About this the last couple days, but this is the time to reiterate it now that, again, you all have a lot of expectations of us as guides, and we have 3 expectations of you, and those 3 things are the things that we need to fulfill for us to be able to climb this mountain safely and do it in a reasonable day. So the first one is that you can manage yourself. So that means taking care of ourselves at breaks. You're rolling into the break and doing the alpine starfish on the snow for 5 minutes, that's not typically a great sign that you're feeling confident to continue higher up the mountain. So rolling into that break, getting your park on, getting some food and some water in you, go to the bathroom right away if you need to, but generally just taking care of ourselves. And also that means our breathing. So keeping control of our breathing, doing all of the things that we've been talking about well to take care of ourselves up here. Second one we need to manage is we need to manage the terrain. So we need to be able to walk safely in this terrain. It's okay to catch a crampon or stumble once or twice on this trip, but if you're stumbling all over the place, you're now just a hazard to the rest of the team, and we can't keep going up if that's the case. So managing that terrain, and then the last thing we need to manage is the pace. If all goes well tomorrow, we're still looking at somewhere in the ballpark of a 14-ish hour day if everything goes smoothly. So if we can't manage the pace that we're setting to accomplish that, that day would be significantly longer and much harder, much more time on our feet. So we need to be able to manage that pace, not pulling on the person in front of us. And if we can do all 3 of those things and you're still having a little bit of fun, then we'll keep climbing, right? So, with that in mind, we got a poster over here that you don't really necessarily need to see. If you can't see it, it's fine. But, it kind of gives us an idea of where we're going and mostly where our breaks is. And the reason that the breaks are especially important is that if we're struggling to do one of those 3 things, we're struggling to manage ourselves or the terrain or the pace, or we're just not having fun anymore and we don't want to be here, we have the ability to turn around with folks and send a guide with a team of people down if people don't want to continue up. But we can't just do that wherever you feel like it along the way. If you're just like, nope, this isn't for me. We gotta be able to get to those breaks so that we can manage that effectively and not waste the resources of the 6 guides that we have. If we're not careful with those resources, that can lead to us eventually having to turn people around that could summit if we're not doing a good job of that. So we're pretty strict about once you're starting a stretch, you're getting to that next break. That's what you're committed to when you leave that break, because we don't really have a great option for turning people around mid-stretch. So once you leave Camp Muir, you're committed to getting to our first break at the Ingraham Flats.
How long is that going to take?
It's
Yeah, exactly. You guys are catching on quick.
There will be a short section of dirt and rock on that first stretch where we'll shorten up the rope interval and walk on there, and then we'll stretch back out right before we get into the flats there. So we'll take our first break there, and that's a spot where if we're struggling to do one of those 3 things or we're just not feeling it, it's not our day, then we can turn around from there. Leaving Ingraham Flats, we'll go up, cross High Crack, and then do a big traverse through a pretty significant area of ice and rockfall hazard. So when we travel through that terrain, we're not running or anything, but we're just moving efficiently through there. If your crampon comes off or something, we're probably not going to stop and mess with it right there. We're going to get out of there and then deal with it once we're somewhere a little safer. In addition, we're going to probably try to just be aware of what's going on. We're not chatting, we're not stopping and taking pictures. We're looking, we're listening, we're paying attention to the mountain as we travel through those sections. Okay? We'll traverse from there on to the Disappointment Cleaver, and then it'll be pretty much all rock and dirt the rest of the way up the Cleaver, up to our second break. This stretch will likely be a little bit longer than an hour, just because there's not a great spot anywhere shorter than that for us to stop. So we want to get to the top of the Cleaver. It'll likely be a little longer than an hour. That break is again another spot where we can manage someone needing to turn around for whatever reason. Leaving the top of the Cleaver, headed for our next break. If we're leaving the top of the Cleaver, we want to be feeling pretty good and feeling confident that we can get to the top of the mountain and then all the way back down safely. So if you're on the fence at that point, then it might be time to consider going downhill. Above the top of the cleaver is not ideal for us to be turning people around. There's a lot going on up there, so sending one guide downhill by themselves is less than ideal. So we're leaving the top of the cleaver, we're going into the top. That's our plan. Leave the top of the cleaver, we'll walk for right at about an hour, and we'll take a high break. Hopefully the sun will be starting to come up somewhere around in here. High break is usually pretty quick. It's not always the most comfortable spot. It's usually still pretty cold at this point. Often I'm walking out of high break wearing my layers and my parka sometimes, especially if it's windy up there. I might walk the last stretch in my parka. Leaving high break, it'll be about an hour.
You ran warm.
Leaving high break about another hour until we're into the summit crater, and then we're on top. That stretch, yeah, I think it's been about an hour for me. Once we're in the summit crater, we're on the top. If the weather allows and everyone's feeling it, or whoever's feeling it, we can unrope, ditch our packs, and we'll walk across, get to the register, sign in to the register. It's on the other side of the summit crater from where we'll enter the crater, and then walk over and stand and take pictures on the highest point of the crater rim on Columbia Crest. Once we do that, we'll walk back over to where we dropped our gear where we entered the crater, and we'll take another quick break there. All in all, with the walk over and back, we're shooting to spend maybe about an hour on top, but that includes 30 to 40 minutes of walking over there and taking pictures and walking back. We'll take another little break there before we start downhill. Remind you of some of those downhill walking techniques and some of the strategies for that and managing the rope. And then we're hoping to go all the way from the crater, the summit crater, to the top of the cleaver in one stretch. Last time it took me 63 minutes, so it's totally doable. Right at an hour or just over to get down to the top of the cleaver. We'll try to layer down when we leave the crater if it's not super windy to help us get all the way down there. We'll take a break at the top of the cleaver on our way down. We'll go down the cleaver, we'll take a break in Ingraham Flats, and then we're down to Camp Muir. Looking about 5.5 hours up, and then an hour on top, and 3.5 hours down, somewhere in that ballpark, depending on crowds and a bunch of other stuff.
Today's climb, I think it was 5:10 is what the 6 groups did this morning. Similar scenarios today, so yeah, looking at like between 5 and 5.5. If it's taken much more than that, like Ben's saying, is like eventually you can only be on your feet for so long, because realizing that the summit is exactly how far?
Halfway.
Exactly halfway. And so, you know, and the down, as you guys probably experienced a little bit the other day, it's not always, it's a little easier in a certain way, and you're gaining more oxygen back, but it's not like when you're walking in crampons on a trail, it's not like going down is like, oh, well, as long as I use all my last bit of my gas to get out in the ocean, it's not like you don't, even though the waves are coming to the beach, doesn't mean that it's not easy, it's easy to surf back in, right? So just keeping that kind of thing in mind, and we can help manage things for you if you're like, you know, I'm not feeling it, and you're like, you know what, honestly, I thought you did really, really well, or whoever it is. I thought, you know, it's up to you. Or we may be like, hey, I really need you to keep the pace, and I need you to stay focused, and we kind of need to do that all the way up into the break to continue on. We'll give you, if you're having a hard time deciding where you're at, we can give you a pretty good idea of what our impression is, whether that be for continuing or not continuing, doesn't really matter, to sort of either encourage you to continue. But again, nobody has to, you don't have to climb this mountain, right? You don't, like, you just have to come home and in one piece. So whatever it takes to do that is that's what we're here for, to help facilitate. And that's, yeah.
And remember that we're here to help you. So if you're walking out and you're like, man, my boot feels weird, or something, I'm struggling with something, talk to whoever's leading your rope. They probably have some tricks that will help you. It may not fix the issue, but it might. And rather than you struggling with something all day,
And
let us know. We're
yeah.
here to help you with that kind of stuff.
Watch
We've
the
done this a
guides
lot.
and try to, mimic what they're doing, or try to match where, if we're walking in the rocks and just a few steps apart, try to match where we're doing it the easiest way we can that's available, and try to, if you realize that you're been hunched over and crawling around on the rock,